In 1985, every state in America finally required car seats for young children. Before that, a newborn could leave the hospital in a mother's arms, riding the front seat at highway speed. That was the rule, not the exception. Here are 25 parenting rules from the 1980s that are illegal now. If you grew up in the 1980s, you probably remember climbing into the back seat of your family car and sprawling across the vinyl bench without a seatbelt in sight. Some kids rode up front on a parent's knee, or curled up on the rear window shelf like a cat in the sun. Seatbelt use among Americans hovered between 11 and 14% in the early 1980s, and most families treated the lap belt as an optional decoration. Tennessee became the first state to pass a child restraint law in 1978, but enforcement was almost non-existent. It took until 1985 for all 50 states to require car seats, and even then, surveys found 65% of parents were installing them wrong. The restraints offered little more than a padded shelf and a flimsy buckle. A sudden stop at 30 miles per hour turned an unrestrained child into a projectile, and the dashboard was solid steel with no give. It was perfectly ordinary for a 10-year-old to walk into a corner store in 1983, slap a crumpled dollar bill on the counter, and ask for a pack of Marlboros for Dad. The clerk would hand them over without blinking, sometimes tossing in a piece of penny candy for the trouble. There was no federal minimum age for purchasing tobacco in the 1980s. State laws varied wildly, and even where age restrictions existed, enforcement was almost non-existent. The Sinar Amendment, passed in 1992, was the first federal law requiring states to enforce minimum age tobacco sales, threatening to cut substance abuse funding for states that failed to comply. Before that, Philip Morris called proposed age limits a threat to their core business in a 1986 internal strategy document. Kids were not just buying cigarettes for their parents. They were the tobacco industry's future customers, and everyone from the manufacturer to the shopkeeper knew it. Lawn darts were 12 inches long, tipped with weighted steel points, and sold right next to the badminton sets at Sears. Families tossed them skyward at backyard barbecues, aiming for plastic rings on the grass, while kids ran through the yard underneath. Between 1980 and 1988, over 6,000 Americans visited emergency rooms because of lawn dart injuries. 81% of them were 15 or younger. In April of 1987, 7-year-old Michelle Snow was playing with dolls in her front yard in Riverside, California, when a dart thrown by a neighbor's child sailed over the backyard fence and struck her in the skull with an estimated 23,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. She was pronounced dead 3 days later. Her father, David, an aerospace engineer at Hughes Aircraft, spent the next year lobbying Congress and the Consumer Product Safety Commission. The CPSC banned all metal-tipped lawn darts in December of 1988, the week before Christmas. On summer evenings across rural America, pickup trucks rolled down two-lane highways with half a dozen kids bouncing around in the open bed, legs dangling over the tailgate. No one questioned it. It was how you got to the swimming hole or your cousin's house 3 towns over. There were no federal restrictions, and most states had no laws against it until the late 1990s. The bed of a pickup offered no restraints, no roll protection, and nothing between a child and the pavement at 55 miles per hour. A sudden stop could send every passenger airborne. What makes this one unsettling is that it still has no comprehensive federal ban. Several states still allow kids to ride in open truck beds, with restrictions varying so wildly that crossing a state line can turn a family outing into a child endangerment charge. But the dangers were not limited to the road. They followed your kids right through the front door, because in the 1980s, millions of American kids came home from school every afternoon to an empty house. They were called Latchkey kids, named for the house key strung around their necks on a shoelace, and by the mid-1980s, the term described an estimated 7 million children under the age of 13. A 1984 documentary called them day orphans. Their parents were not negligent. They were working, often 2 jobs, in an economy that offered almost no affordable after-school care. But a 6-year-old heating soup on a gas stove, answering the door to strangers, and managing household emergencies alone for 3 or 4 hours every afternoon was considered perfectly normal. Illinois now sets the minimum age for leaving a child home alone at 14. In the 1980s, most states had no minimum at all. The cigarette smoke was everywhere. It drifted through living rooms, filled up station wagons with the windows rolled up, and hung in a blue-gray haze above the dinner table. In the 1980s, over 30% of American adults smoked, and the concept of protecting kids from secondhand exposure barely existed. The Surgeon General did not release a report addressing the dangers of involuntary smoking until 1986. Restaurants had smoking sections separated from families by nothing more than a 3-foot gap between tables. Pediatricians' waiting rooms had ashtrays. In 1988, Congress banned smoking on domestic flights shorter than 2 hours, but inside American homes, kids kept breathing it in. Government data from that year showed 88% of non-smokers, including millions of kids, had detectable levels of cotinine, a nicotine byproduct, in their blood. The playground at your elementary school in 1982 was not designed with safety in mind. It was designed to survive weather. The monkey bars were welded steel pipe, rising 10 or 12 feet above packed dirt or cracked asphalt. The slides were bare metal that absorbed the summer sun until they could raise blisters on exposed skin. The merry-go-rounds were heavy iron platforms spinning fast enough to launch a child sideways, and the seesaws were wooden planks on steel fulcrums that could crack a jaw on the way down. In 1981, the Consumer Product Safety Commission published its first handbook for public playground safety after tracking thousands of emergency room visits. The CDC declared traditional monkey bars unsuitable for safe playgrounds in the early 1980s. 75% of all playground injuries resulted from falls onto inadequate surfaces. The equipment stayed in place at most schools for another decade. Every kid in the 1980s owned a bicycle, and almost none of them owned a helmet. You rode to school, to the arcade, to the creek and back with nothing between your skull and the asphalt, but a bad haircut and good luck. The modern bicycle helmet was not introduced until 1975, and fewer than 5% of child cyclists wore one throughout the decade. No state required helmet use for kids until California passed a limited law in 1987 covering only passengers under 5. The CPSC estimated that 50,000 children under 15 suffered serious head injuries from bicycle accidents every year. New Jersey became the first state to require helmets for all child cyclists in 1992, and fatalities in the state dropped from 10 to 2 in the first full year. In the 1980s, baby walkers were one of the most popular baby shower gifts in America. Every young family had one. A wheeled plastic frame with a fabric seat that let a baby scoot across the kitchen floor before they could even stand. What parents did not realize was that a baby in a walker could reach speeds of 4 feet per second fast enough to cross a room and reach an open stairway in the time it took to answer the phone. By 1990, over 21,000 children under 15 months were treated in emergency rooms every year for walker-related injuries, mostly from tumbling downstairs. The falls were worse than ordinary tumbles because the rigid frame added weight and momentum, and the baby's head was first to strike the ground. Canada banned baby walkers outright in 2004. The American Academy of Pediatrics has called for a ban for decades. The United States has never issued one. If you misbehaved in school in the 1980s, the punishment might not be detention. It might be a wooden paddle. In Pickens County, Alabama, the school board specified the dimensions precisely: a paddle 24 inches long, 3 inches wide, and half an inch thick. In 1977, the Supreme Court ruled in Ingram v. Rite that paddling students did not violate the Eighth Amendment after a Florida principal struck 8th grader James Ingram more than 20 times, hard enough to require medical attention. The court voted 5-4 that this was constitutional. At the peak in 1978, 4% of all American schoolchildren were paddled at least once during the year. African American students were struck at nearly 3 times the rate of white classmates for identical offenses. 25 states banned the practice between 1974 and 1994. 17 states still allow it today. If the schoolyard paddle seems hard to believe, consider what happened after the final bell. In the early 1980s, a 17-year-old in many states could walk into a bar, order a beer, and drink it legally. The legal drinking age was 18, 19, or 20 in dozens of states, a patchwork left over from the Vietnam-era argument that if you were old enough to be drafted, you were old enough to drink. The consequence was a generation of teenagers behind the wheel after nights at bars and keg parties with no legal barrier between them and the highway. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, founded in 1980, pushed relentlessly for change. The National Minimum Drinking Age Act, signed by President Reagan on July 17, 1984, threatened to withhold 10% of federal highway funding from any state that refused to raise its age to 21. South Dakota and Wyoming held out until 1988. The law has been credited with saving over 18,000 lives. In rural America, putting kids to work was not considered abuse. It was considered education. Children as young as 8 drove tractors, operated hay balers, herded livestock through metal chutes, and handled pesticides with skull and crossbones labels. Federal child labor laws have always included a sweeping exemption for agriculture. A 12-year-old cannot legally stock shelves at a grocery store, but that same child can work unlimited hours on a commercial farm with parental consent. On family operations, there is no minimum age at all. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health has called agriculture the most dangerous industry open to young workers in America. Throughout the 1980s, hundreds of kids were seriously injured by tractor rollovers, power takeoff entanglements, and grain bin engulfments, equipment that weighed thousands of pounds and had no shutoffs designed for small hands. That exemption has never been repealed. The medicine cabinet in your parents' bathroom in 1982 had no child-proof lock on the door and no safety caps on half the bottles inside. The Poison Prevention Packaging Act had been on the books since 1970, requiring safety closures on certain medications, but compliance was spotty and enforcement was weak. Aspirin was the leading cause of childhood poisoning deaths throughout the 70s, and bottles sat on kitchen counters within easy reach of toddlers. Cleaning products under the sink came in bright containers with no secondary locking mechanism. The sweet taste of children's vitamins, shaped like cartoon characters, made them indistinguishable from candy to a 3-year-old. By the mid-1980s, poison control centers fielded over 1 million calls per year involving kids under 6. It took decades of tightened regulations before childhood poisoning rates dropped significantly. The chemistry sets sold to American kids in the 1980s were not toys dressed up as science. They were laboratories in a box. Kits from companies like Skillcraft and Mr. Wizard included potassium permanganate, sodium hydroxide, calcium hypochlorite, and acids strong enough to etch glass. The Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Lab, sold in the 50s, had included actual uranium ore. But even the tamer kits of the 80s gave a 10-year-old access to chemicals that could cause burns, toxic fumes, and small explosions if mixed wrong. The instructions were printed in tiny type on a folded insert most kids threw away. There were no goggles in the box, no ventilation warnings, and no age verification at purchase. The CPSC gradually tightened restrictions through the 90s, stripping out the most reactive compounds until what remained was closer to a baking soda volcano than a real experiment. Before the face of a missing child appeared on every milk carton in America, hitchhiking was just how kids got around. A 12-year-old could stand at the edge of a county road with a thumb out and catch a ride to football practice or a friend's farm, and most parents considered it resourceful rather than reckless. Then, on July 27, 1981, 6-year-old Adam Walsh was abducted from a Sears department store in Hollywood, Florida. His murder changed everything. Congress passed the Missing Children Act in 1982 and the Missing Children's Assistance Act in 1984, creating the National Center for Missing and Exploited Kids. The era of young ones moving freely through public space began to collapse, and hitchhiking went from a normal part of growing up to something that could trigger a call to the police. It cost nothing and required no equipment. You just sat your toddler on your lap behind the steering wheel and let them grab it with both hands while you worked the pedals. In parking lots, on dirt roads, and sometimes on quiet suburban streets, parents treated this as a bonding ritual, a first driving lesson for a kid who could barely see over the dashboard. Nobody called it dangerous because everyone did it. What nobody thought about was the steering column, an unpadded steel shaft aimed directly at the child's chest in a collision, or the fact that a toddler's hands on the wheel could jerk it sideways without warning. Today, a child under 2 is required by law to ride rear-facing in a crash-tested car seat anchored to the frame. The distance between that lap and that car seat is about 40 years of regulation written in grief. For most of the 1980s, pediatricians told new parents to put their babies to sleep on their stomachs. The reasoning was that a baby sleeping face down was less likely to choke if they spit up during the night. It was standard medical advice, printed in parenting books, repeated in hospital nurseries, and followed by millions of families without question. The problem was that it was wrong, and it was killing babies. Sudden infant death syndrome claimed thousands of infants every year throughout the decade, and researchers in Australia and New Zealand were gathering evidence that stomach sleeping dramatically increased the risk. The American Academy of Pediatrics did not launch its Back to Sleep campaign until 1994. Within a decade of that recommendation, SIDS rates in the United States dropped by over 50%. The math is devastating. For years, the medical establishment was advising parents to do the exact thing most likely to kill their baby in the night. When you got thirsty playing outside in the 1980s, you did not go inside for a glass of water. You walked to the side of the house, turned on the garden hose, let it run for a second to flush out the warm water, and drank straight from the nozzle. Every kid did it. Every parent allowed it. What nobody knew was that the brass fittings connecting the hose to the spigot were often soldered with lead, and the vinyl hose material itself could contain lead, phthalates, and other plasticizers that leached into the water, especially after baking in the sun all afternoon. Independent testing decades later found lead levels in water from garden hoses that exceeded EPA drinking water limits by several times over. California did not pass a law restricting toxic substances in garden hoses until 2014. Before that, the only thing between your kid and a mouthful of lead-contaminated water was the assumption that if it came from a hose, it was fine. By the late 1980s, indoor tanning salons had spread across American strip malls like fast food restaurants, and teenagers were their most loyal customers. A 14-year-old could walk into a tanning bed with no parental consent, no age verification, and no limit on how many sessions they booked per week. The beds blasted skin with ultraviolet radiation at intensities up to 12 times stronger than the midday sun. The tanning industry marketed directly to young women, selling prom packages and unlimited monthly passes to high school students, while their own trade groups downplayed the cancer risk in public statements. The World Health Organization eventually classified tanning beds as a Group 1 carcinogen, the same category as tobacco and asbestos. The first state to restrict minors from using tanning beds was California, and that law did not take effect until 2012. For over 2 decades, the industry operated with almost no age restrictions anywhere in the country. If tanning beds cooked skin from the outside, the family car did it from the inside. Throughout the 1980s, parents routinely left small children sitting in parked cars while they ran into the grocery store, the post office, or the bank. The windows might be cracked an inch, a comic book might be tossed into the back seat, and the errand that was supposed to take 5 minutes often stretched to 20 or 30. On a sunny day, the interior of a closed car can reach 120 degrees within minutes. A child's body temperature rises 3 to 5 times faster than an adult's, and heat stroke can set in before a toddler even has the ability to unbuckle a seatbelt or open a door. The National Safety Council has tracked hot car deaths since 1998 and recorded an average of 38 child fatalities per year. Most states now classify leaving a young child unattended in a vehicle as a criminal offense. In 1980, the Surgeon General released the first report focused on the effects of smoking during pregnancy. By that point, millions of American women had smoked through every trimester for decades, often with the knowledge of their obstetricians. Cigarette ads in women's magazines showed slim, glamorous mothers-to-be, and many doctors dismissed concerns, telling patients that cutting back was sufficient. The science already showed otherwise. Smoking during pregnancy restricted blood flow to the placenta, stunted fetal growth, doubled the risk of low birth weight, and increased the likelihood of premature delivery and stillbirth. Nicotine crossed the placental barrier freely, dosing the developing brain directly. By 1989, roughly 20% of pregnant American women still smoked. The tobacco companies had suppressed their own research on fetal harm for years, treating the unborn as acceptable collateral in the defense of their profits. In the Rust Belt cities of the 1980s, shuttered factories and abandoned houses were as common as corner stores, and they were the best playgrounds a kid could find. You could climb rusted fire escapes, throw rocks through already broken windows, and explore rooms full of rotting furniture and peeling walls. Nobody stopped you because nobody was watching. The buildings were full of exposed nails, crumbling floors that could give way underfoot, and asbestos insulation hanging from pipes like Spanish moss. In cities like Detroit, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh, entire blocks sat vacant, and kids treated them as obstacle courses. The legal doctrine of attractive nuisance had existed for decades, holding property owners liable for hazards that could lure kids, but enforcement against bankrupt or absent landlords was rare. Municipal demolition budgets were gutted. The buildings stayed standing, the kids kept going in, and the injuries were treated as bad luck rather than negligence. On lakes and rivers across the 1980s, families loaded kids into aluminum fishing boats and pontoon rafts with no life jackets on board and no law requiring them. A 5-year-old could sit on the bow of a motorboat skimming across open water at 30 miles per hour with nothing holding them in place but a hand on the railing. The Coast Guard estimated that drowning was the second leading cause of accidental death for kids under 14 throughout the decade, and the vast majority of those who drowned in boating incidents were not wearing any flotation device. Federal law did not require life jackets for all kids aboard recreational vessels until the Child Boating Safety Act of 1999, and even that only covered kids under 13. Before it passed, the decision was left entirely to parents, many of whom believed that knowing how to swim was enough. The federal government banned lead paint for residential use in 1978, but the ban did nothing about the millions of homes already coated in it. Throughout the 1980s, kids in older apartments and houses crawled across floors covered in chipping lead paint, put painted wooden blocks in their mouths, and breathed in lead dust stirred up every time a window was opened or a door frame scraped its jamb. The paint tasted sweet, and toddlers peeled it from windowsills like candy. The CDC set the blood lead action level at 25 micrograms per deciliter in 1985, a threshold so high that thousands of kids with significant lead poisoning went undiagnosed. That number has been lowered repeatedly, since most recently to 3.5 in 2021. In the 1980s, landlords in cities like Baltimore and Philadelphia were sued in waves by families whose kids tested positive for lead poisoning, but the cost of abatement kept many buildings untouched for years. If lead was the poison hiding in the walls, the discipline waiting on the other side was just as accepted and just as damaging. In the 1980s, spanking was not a last resort. It was the first response. Surveys from the decade showed that over 90% of American parents spanked their toddlers, and a majority considered it not only effective but morally correct. Belts, wooden spoons, and switches were household disciplinary tools discussed openly at PTA meetings and church suppers. The line between spanking and abuse was wherever the parent decided to draw it, and the law offered almost no guidance. Murray Strauss, the sociologist who spent decades studying corporal punishment at the University of New Hampshire, published research showing that kids who were regularly spanked had measurably higher rates of aggression, anxiety, and cognitive difficulty. His work was dismissed for years. No state has banned parental spanking. Most still have explicit legal exceptions for what they call reasonable physical discipline. On the 4th of July in the 1980s, the adults handled the big stuff and the kids got everything else. Bottle rockets, Roman candles, firecrackers, and sparklers were handed to 8-year-olds like party favors. A sparkler burns at approximately 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt gold and it was the most common firework given to the youngest hands. The Consumer Product Safety Commission reported over 10,000 firework-related injuries per year throughout the decade, with a third of them involving kids under 15. Missing fingers, burns across palms and faces, and permanent eye damage filled emergency rooms every July. State laws were a patchwork. Some banned aerial fireworks but allowed ground-level explosives. Others had no restrictions at all. A parent lighting a fuse and handing a Roman candle to a 10-year-old was not breaking any law in most of the country. Sunscreen existed in the 1980s, but most parents treated it the way they treated flossing, something you were supposed to do but almost never did. Kids spent entire summer days outside, from morning until the streetlights came on, with no sunscreen, no hats, and no shade breaks. A sunburn was considered a rite of passage, the painful first step toward a summer tan, and mothers rubbed Noxzema on blistered shoulders like it was medicine rather than cold cream. The connection between childhood sunburns and adult skin cancer was already established in the medical literature by the late 70s, but the information had not reached the average family. Dermatologists now estimate that just 5 severe sunburns before the age of 20 increases melanoma risk by 80%. Pediatric sunscreen guidelines from the AAP did not become standard practice until the mid-1990s, and broad-spectrum SPF labeling was not regulated by the FDA until 2011. The crib your parents put you in during the 1980s might have been handed down from a cousin, bought at a yard sale, or pulled from the attic where it had sat since your older sister outgrew it. Drop-side cribs, which allowed one rail to slide up and down for easier access, were the industry standard. The hardware loosened over time, creating gaps wide enough to trap a baby's head or torso between the mattress and the rail. Soft bumper pads tied to the inside of the crib were marketed as a safety product, designed to keep little arms and legs from poking through the slats, but they created a suffocation hazard that went unrecognized for decades. Between 1985 and 2007, the CPSC documented over 30 infant deaths linked directly to drop-side crib failures. The agency did not ban drop-side cribs until 2011. Bumper pads remained legal and widely sold even longer, despite the AAP recommending against them for years. When your parents needed a babysitter in the 1980s, they asked the neighbor's teenager, the lady from church, or whoever answered the index card pinned to the grocery store bulletin board. There was no background check, no certification, no registry, and no legal requirement of any kind. A complete stranger could walk into your house, be handed the keys and a phone number, and be left alone with your kids for the entire evening. Daycare centers operated with similarly thin oversight. Licensing requirements varied wildly by state, and many home-based operations had no license at all. The McMartin preschool trial, which began in 1983 in Manhattan Beach, California, became the longest and most expensive criminal trial in American history and exposed how little vetting existed in the childcare industry. The case itself was deeply flawed, but the panic it generated pushed states to begin mandating background checks for childcare workers throughout the 1990s. In the 1980s, a 5-year-old walking 6 blocks to kindergarten without an adult was not a news story. It was a Tuesday. Kids walked to school, walked home for lunch, walked back, and walked home again, crossing intersections with no crossing guards, cutting through alleys, and navigating traffic on roads with no sidewalks. Parents stood in the doorway, watched until the kid turned the corner and went back inside. It was freedom, and it was ordinary. In 2015, a Maryland couple was investigated by Child Protective Services for allowing their 10- and 6-year-old to walk home from a park alone, a mile from their house, in broad daylight. The Maytiv case made national headlines and triggered a debate about free-range parenting that is still unresolved. What was once the default way every American child got to school is now, in many jurisdictions, grounds for a welfare check, a CPS file, or a misdemeanor charge against the parents who allowed it. When grown-ups were speaking, you waited. That was not just a family rule, it was gospel. You did not chime in. You did not shout over. You definitely did not tug on anyone's sleeve mid-sentence unless it was a code-red emergency, like someone bleeding or the house being on fire. Otherwise, you learned patience. Respecting adult conversations was about more than politeness. It taught you that you were not the center of the universe. And that was not a bad thing. In fact, it gave you a kind of map for how to behave in the world. You listened, you waited, you learned when to speak and when to keep your mouth shut. Sometimes you did not like it. Sometimes you really wanted to tell a story about what happened at recess or that cool new thing you built out of popsicle sticks. But you held it. You waited for a pause, or better yet, for someone to turn to you and say, "Okay, what were you trying to say?" The point was, kids were taught early on that respect had a sound, and that sound was silence while someone else was speaking. It was not meant to stifle you. It was meant to show you where your voice fit and how strong it could be when used at the right time. In the 1970s, grocery shopping with children often meant letting them stand inside the cart, lean over the sides, or ride on the front like they were surfing a metal wave. Parents pushed the cart faster than they should have, racing down aisles while kids squealed with laughter. Some children balanced on the lower bars or dangled their legs out like they were riding a parade float. No one stopped to consider the danger of tipping over or hitting a shelf. It was simply part of the weekly routine. Grocery stores did not have warning signs or strict policies, and employees rarely said a word even when a child was clearly on the verge of toppling out. Parents believed that children needed to have fun wherever they could, especially during chores that otherwise bored everyone to tears. Today, retail safety guidelines strictly prohibit these behaviors because cart accidents are far more serious than people once realized. Modern carts carry warning labels, stores enforce rules, and many parents are hyper-aware of injuries that can result from falls. What was once a harmless distraction is now treated as a preventable accident waiting to happen. Good manners were not negotiable. They were expected. You said please when you asked for something. You said thank you when you got it. Every single time. And if you forgot, you got the look. That sharp, raised eyebrow look from across the room that made you immediately blurt it out. Saying please and thank you was drilled into you from the moment you could talk. It was not just about being polite, it was about showing respect. Whether you were talking to a neighbor, a teacher, or the mailman, those two words were your passcode into being taken seriously. And if you rolled your eyes or said it with an attitude, guess what? You were saying it again, this time like you meant it. Parents did not play around with manners. It was their way of teaching you how to treat people, how to carry yourself, how to move through the world without acting like you owned the place. And honestly, it stuck. To this day, you probably still feel a little weird if you do not say thank you at the drive-thru. That is not just habit, it is muscle memory from a time when those words mattered more than you realized. In the 1970s, many families burned household trash in small backyard or driveway incinerators, treating it as a normal part of weekly cleanup. Parents tossed in newspapers, cardboard, food scraps, and old packaging while children rode their bikes in circles around the rising smoke. The flames crackled, the air filled with the smell of burning paper, and nobody questioned whether the fumes were safe to breathe. Kids often poked at cooled ashes or tossed twigs into the fire for fun, completely unaware of how unpredictable open burning can be. Parents believed the heat and smoke were harmless as long as the flames stayed inside the metal bin. It was a moment of freedom and simplicity, a routine chore that brought the family outside together. Today, driveway incinerators are banned in most places because of air quality laws, fire risks, and environmental regulations. Burning household waste releases harmful chemicals, and the open flames are considered hazardous, especially around children. What once felt like a simple chore is now a violation of modern fire codes and environmental rules. Buying cigarettes for parents at the corner store was a common errand for children throughout the 1980s, as routine as picking up milk or bread. Kids walked into convenience stores, asked for a specific brand, handed over crumpled bills, and walked out with a pack tucked under their arm without anyone raising an eyebrow. Clerks never asked for identification because nobody expected them to. Parents trusted their children with the task because it saved them a trip, and shopkeepers saw nothing unusual about selling tobacco to a minor acting on behalf of an adult. The transaction felt ordinary, even helpful. a small responsibility that made kids feel grown up and capable. Some children memorized their parents' preferred brands before they could spell their own last names. Today, though, selling tobacco to minors is a criminal offense that can result in fines, license revocations, and even jail time for repeat offenders. Identification checks are mandatory, and the idea of sending a child to buy cigarettes feels not just outdated, but shocking. The errand that once seemed so innocent now represents a world that no longer exists. If the phone rang after 9 o'clock, you knew something was wrong. Someone was in the hospital, or worse. Phones were sacred after dark. The living room phone sat on a table like a shrine, usually with a long spiral cord and a notepad for messages. If you were a kid, you did not touch it past 9. And if you did, you were in for it. Calling someone that late was seen as inconsiderate at best, rude at worst. It meant you were disrupting family time, bedtime, or the news. Back then, phones were not entertainment. They were tools, and tools had rules. You planned your social life during daylight hours. You called friends right after school. If you needed more time, you wrote a note, but no calls after 9. That was the line. There was no call waiting, no voicemail, no texting to say, "Sorry, I missed you." You either reached someone or you did not. And if you woke someone's dad up, forget about it. You might as well disappear for a week. It is wild to think how much power that little dial phone had, just sitting there, reminding you to mind your manners and the hour. Building a treehouse in the 1970s was one of the purest childhood adventures. You gathered whatever boards you could find, borrowed nails from your father's toolbox, and climbed the nearest sturdy tree without taking a single moment to check for stability. Kids balanced on branches, hammered crooked planks into place, and made ladders out of anything long enough to lean against the trunk. No blueprints, no measurements, no adult inspector watching over the project. The entire point was the freedom to create something dangerously charming. Many tree houses leaned in odd directions or wobbled with every step, yet that only added to the pride kids felt when inviting friends over to climb inside parents rarely supervised because they believed children needed to learn problem-solving, teamwork, and bravery the hard way. A splinter was a badge of honor, and a tumble from a branch was considered a learning experience rather than a crisis. Today, however, building a treehouse with scrap wood and little oversight would break multiple safety guidelines. Modern standards require adult supervision, protective gear, and stable materials because unstable structures are considered a significant risk. Schools, insurers, and city codes now restrict elevated play structures without proper design. The once beloved childhood tradition of building your own high-rise hideout has been transformed into a regulated activity that demands caution instead of creativity. Leaving kids home alone at age 6 or 7 was simply part of life in the 1980s, something parents did without guilt, fear, or a second thought. Children came home from school, unlocked the door with a key tied to their shoelace, and entertained themselves for hours until a parent returned from work. They were called Latchkey kids, and the term carried no shame, only a quiet sense of independence that the era valued above almost everything else. Kids learned to heat up leftovers, answer the phone politely, and manage small emergencies without adult supervision. Parents trusted their children to handle responsibility, believing it built character and prepared them for the real world. Nobody worried about neighbors calling authorities or strangers peering through windows. The house felt safe, familiar, and entirely theirs for those precious afternoon hours. Today, though, leaving a young child home alone can trigger investigations, legal consequences, and accusations of neglect. Child welfare laws in many states now set minimum age requirements that would have seemed absurd to families in the 1980s. The freedom that once taught self-reliance is now treated as abandonment. Nobody got out of it. Chores were a family affair, and if you lived in the house, you pitched in. It did not matter how old you were. If you could walk, you could wipe something. Every Saturday morning started with a vacuum humming, a mop sloshing, or someone being told to take out the trash. There were no debates about fairness. If your name was on the chart or mom said your turn, that was it. You did it. And if you forgot, Oh, she would remind you, probably with your full name. Some kids mowed lawns, others folded laundry, and everyone hated dishes. But you did them. Why? Because you were part of the team. You learned that homes did not run on magic. They ran on effort. Small hands sweeping the porch, emptying the lint trap, wiping down counters. It was not glamorous. It was not fun. But it taught responsibility, and more than that, it showed you what contributing looked like. It made you feel useful. It made you feel needed. Sure, you grumbled about it, but part of you liked knowing that Saturday was cleaning day. There was order in it, and when the house was clean and the chores were done, the reward was not just a gold star. It was the quiet pride of knowing you helped. Back in the 70s, helping start the family grill felt like an honor reserved for the bravest kid in the yard. Parents handed over a bottle of lighter fluid with total confidence, expecting children to splash it across charcoal like they had watched adults do for years. The whoosh of flames rising caught their breath, but it also thrilled them. Kids learned quickly how much fluid to squeeze, how close to stand, and how to dodge the heat when the fire jumped higher than expected. No one wore gloves, no one checked wind direction, and no one worried about flare-ups. It was simply a backyard skill taught the same way families taught children to ride bikes or rake leaves. Parents believed that letting kids help with fire made them self-sufficient and trustworthy. Today, minors handling lighter fluid is banned in many places and strongly discouraged in the rest. Modern safety guidelines warn about burns, chemical exposure, and flash fires that can happen in seconds. What was once a rite of passage is now categorized as an avoidable hazard that only trained adults should manage. Letting kids drink sips of beer or wine at family gatherings was treated as harmless fun in the 1980s, a small indulgence that made children feel included in adult celebrations. Uncles offered tiny tastes from their cans. Grandparents poured half-inches of wine into juice glasses, and parents laughed as kids made faces at the bitter or sour flavors they were not yet ready to enjoy. Nobody considered it dangerous or inappropriate because it happened at home, surrounded by family, in a context that felt safe and controlled. Many parents believed early exposure would teach moderation and prevent the rebellious binge drinking they feared would come later. It was a rite of passage wrapped in holiday dinners, backyard barbecues, and wedding receptions where everyone shared everything. But medical research and legal standards have since drawn firm lines around minors and alcohol. Giving alcohol to anyone under 21 is now illegal in most circumstances, regardless of setting or intent. What families once saw as bonding has become a liability, a shift that transformed innocent sips into something modern law treats very differently. There was no footnote, no explanation. Because I said so was not up for debate. It was the full stop of every parent-child negotiation in the 70s. And once you heard it, you knew that conversation was over. It was not about being mean, it was about authority. Parents were not interested in drawing flowcharts about why bedtime was 8 o'clock or why you could not have candy for dinner. They had rules, and you followed them. Questioning those rules? That got you the look. You know the one. That mix of, do not test me and you're really going to push this right now? Every kid heard, because I said so, and immediately felt the gravity of the moment. It was the verbal equivalent of a gavel slamming down. Sure, sometimes it felt unfair. Sometimes it made you stew in your room, staring at the ceiling, trying to think of comebacks that would never be spoken out loud. But in hindsight, it had its place. It created structure. It set boundaries. It reminded you that someone had to steer the ship, and it was not the 7-year-old in Scooby-Doo pajamas. And strangely enough, the finality of it brought a weird kind of comfort. At least you knew where the line was drawn. In the 1970s, teaching a child to shoot a BB gun or pellet gun was not just normal. It was practically expected. In many neighborhoods. Parents saw these small air-powered guns as harmless tools for discipline, responsibility, and skill building. Kids set up targets made of tin cans, old bottles, and cardboard boxes, then spent afternoons practicing their aim with no adults watching from the porch. Safety goggles were almost non-existent, and instructions were often limited to simple advice like, do not shoot toward the house. For many kids, This was their introduction to independence, outdoorsmanship, and the thrill of being trusted with something that looked and felt like a real weapon. They learned to pump the gun, load the pellets, and fire repeatedly without anyone reminding them to be careful. Today, however, unsupervised use of BB guns is treated very differently. Many regions classify them as weapons requiring adult presence, secure storage, and strict oversight. Injuries from ricochets, eye damage, and accidental shootings pushed modern laws to restrict their use. What was once considered a harmless backyard pastime is now viewed as a high-risk activity that demands responsibility and supervision. Using corporal punishment as primary discipline was something almost every household in the 1980s accepted without debate. Spankings, paddlings, and the occasional swat with a wooden spoon were considered normal tools of parenting, passed down through generations as the surest way to correct behavior. Schools reinforced the message, with principals keeping paddles in their offices and teachers allowed to administer physical consequences for misbehavior. Kids grew up understanding that breaking rules meant physical discomfort, and most parents believed this approach taught respect and self-control. Nobody questioned whether it worked because everyone around them did the same thing. The phrase, "spare the rod, spoil the child," echoed through churches and neighborhood conversations like unshakable truth. But over the following decades, research revealed how physical punishment could harm development and long-term well-being. Schools across the country banned the practice, and many states now regulate what parents can legally do at home. What was once considered responsible parenting is now viewed through a lens of concern that the 1980s never imagined. Dinner was not a democracy. Whatever hit the table was what you were eating, whether you liked it or not. Broccoli? Tough? Liver and onions? Say your prayers. Picky eaters had no place at the table unless they planned on going to bed hungry, which, believe it or not, was not an empty threat. There was no separate kids menu or microwavable backup. Your plate looked exactly like your parents' plate, and your only job was to clear it. Some kids developed impressive negotiating skills trying to hide green beans under mashed potatoes, but in the end, moms always found out. Complaining? That was asking for trouble. A raised eyebrow from dad was enough to turn a muttered "gross" into a sincere "thank you." We are talking about a time when food was not taken for granted. Leftovers were planned. Casseroles were an art. And wasting anything was practically a sin. You respected the work that went into dinner because you saw it happen. Peeling, chopping, baking, and stirring while the news played in the background. Even now, there is something grounding about that memory. That moment when everyone sat down, the television was turned off, and you ate what was served. Maybe you did not love every bite, but you appreciated the ritual. And you learned that being full sometimes meant being grateful, not just satisfied. In the 70s, spotting a stray dog or cat wandering the neighborhood was an instant invitation for kids to gather around, extend a hand, and offer scraps from their lunchboxes. Parents encouraged it as a lesson in kindness, believing that feeding a hungry animal showed compassion and community spirit. Children followed stray pets for blocks, naming them, petting them, and sometimes even bringing them home without warning. Nobody worried about bites, illnesses, or the animal's temperament. Strays were treated like roaming friends rather than unknown creatures with unpredictable behavior. Kids loved the sense of connection and adventure, especially when a stray followed them to school or waited outside their house like a loyal companion. Today, however, public health guidelines warn against interacting with strays due to risks such as bites, parasites, and diseases. Animal control services handle these situations, and children are taught to observe from a distance instead of approaching. The warm nostalgia of befriending a neighborhood stray has been replaced with caution rooted in modern safety standards. Allowing kids to play with realistic toy guns in public was one of the most common sights in neighborhoods throughout the 1980s. Children chased each other through yards, parks, and streets carrying plastic pistols, cap guns, and replica rifles that looked nearly identical to the real thing. Parents bought these toys without hesitation, believing they encouraged imaginative play, outdoor activity, and the kind of adventurous spirit childhood was supposed to nurture. Nobody worried about how a passing driver or a concerned neighbor might react because everyone understood these were toys. The bangs, the smoke from cap rolls, and the dramatic falls were all part of games that stretched from morning until the streetlights flickered on. Police rarely intervened, and when they did, it was usually with a smile and a wave. Today, though, realistic toy guns have been banned or heavily restricted in most areas. Orange tips are mandatory, sales are regulated, and children carrying anything resembling a weapon can trigger emergency responses that end in tragedy. The innocent play that once filled summer afternoons is now viewed through a lens of fear that the 1980s never anticipated. The television did not just magically turn on the second you got home. Watching TV in the 70s was a privilege, not a right. First, you had to earn it, and that meant chores, homework, and proving you could sit still without bouncing off the furniture. And even if you did all that, you still had to wait your turn. There was one television in the house, maybe two if you were fancy, and whichever room it was in. That was the room where everyone gathered. Parents had first dibs, always. If your dad wanted to watch the evening news or Bonanza, you were watching the news or Bonanza. End of story. Kids would hold on to the TV guide like it was a sacred scroll, planning out the week and praying no one else called the living room first. Cartoons? Those were only on Saturday mornings, and if you missed them, you missed them. No rewinds, no streaming. If you got to watch your favorite show after dinner, it felt like winning a prize. But behind that prize was a set of rules. Be helpful, be done with schoolwork, and do not sass back. Television was not a babysitter. It was a treat. And in some strange way, not having it whenever we wanted made us appreciate it even more. Those moments in front of the screen felt earned, deserved, and sometimes shared. In the 1970s, a child knocking on strangers' doors with a box of candy or a stack of greeting cards was as ordinary as seeing kids ride bikes at dusk. Schools, clubs, and neighborhood groups encouraged it, and parents saw no issue with sending their child out alone with nothing but a hopeful smile and a handwritten list of prices. Many kids went block to block practicing their best sales pitch while walking through unfamiliar streets without any adult nearby. It was not a question of danger, it was a question of character building. Adults believed that selling door to door taught confidence, independence, and social courage. If a stranger invited a child inside to count change or look for a checkbook, no one panicked. It was simply how community life worked. Kids learned to manage money, carry product boxes, and keep track of their sales, often staying out until the porch lights flicked on. Today, the idea of sending a child unsupervised into the homes of unknown adults is considered unthinkable. Modern child safety laws stress controlled environments, adult chaperones, and strict rules about interactions with strangers. Door-to-door sales for minors now require supervision, permission forms, and sometimes even background-checked adults. What was once celebrated as a sign of trust in the community is now classified as a risk that society is unwilling to accept. Leaving babies to sleep on their stomachs was the standard advice pediatricians gave to new parents throughout the 1980s. Doctors believed stomach sleeping helped infants feel secure, reduced the risk of choking, and encouraged deeper, more restful sleep. Nurses in hospital nurseries positioned newborns face down as a matter of routine, and parenting books reinforced the practice with confident authority. Mothers followed these instructions without question, tucking their babies onto their bellies night after night, trusting that medical professionals knew best. Cribs were arranged, mattresses flattened, and bedtimes followed the same pattern in millions of homes. But as research into sudden infant death syndrome expanded, scientists discovered that stomach sleeping dramatically increased the risk of SIDS. The revelation shocked parents who had done exactly what they were told. Health organizations launched campaigns to spread the word, and today placing a baby to sleep on its stomach is strongly discouraged by every major pediatric authority. The advice that once felt medically sound now serves as a sobering reminder of how much we still had to learn. There was no need for a watch when the sky did the parenting for you. Once those streetlights flickered on, it was as if a silent alarm went off in every kid's brain. You could be in the middle of an intense game of tag, halfway up a tree, or deep in an imaginary mission. But when those lights came on, it was over. No excuses, no pleading. It did not matter if you were winning. You ran home like your life depended on it. Because if your mom had to call for you after the lights were already on, you were not going outside the next day. That was a law stronger than any city ordinance. Parents did not need GPS or Life 360. They trusted the streetlight system, and believe it or not, so did we. It was the great equalizer. Every kid, every block, every neighborhood. You knew who was allowed to push it and who had a mom with a wooden spoon collection. There was a certain poetry to that routine too, knowing when your day of freedom ended not with a bang, but with a glow. Ask anyone who grew up in the 70s what time they had to be home, and they will not say 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock. They will just point at a street lamp. Back in the 70s, one of the greatest childhood thrills was standing between the front seats while your parents drove, gripping the headrests like handlebars as the wind rushed through the cracked windows. Kids loved the feeling of being tall, important, and directly involved in the journey. Some even leaned forward to help steer, placing tiny hands on the wheel while parents laughed and pretended it made a difference. There was no concept of car accidents happening in the blink of an eye. The world felt slower, safer, and strangely forgiving. Seatbelts were optional, and many families treated them like suggestions rather than rules. If the car braked too hard and a child tumbled backward into the back seat, everyone laughed instead of panicking. The front row was the throne, and kids naturally gravitated toward it. Parents believed it helped with bonding and connection during long drives, especially when the radio buzzed with static and conversation carried the miles. Today, child passenger laws prohibit this entirely because unrestrained children are at extreme risk during any sudden movement or collision. Modern guidelines require proper seats, harnesses, and locked positions far from airbags and impact zones. What once felt like a warm part of family road trips is now considered one of the most dangerous habits a parent could allow. Letting kids walk miles to school unsupervised was one of the defining rituals of childhood in the 1980s. Children left the house with backpacks slung over their shoulders and headed down sidewalks, across busy intersections, and through neighborhoods where adults barely glanced up from their morning routines. Parents trusted that the world was safe enough, that drivers would stop, that strangers would mind their own business, and that kids would arrive on time without incident. Many children walked in small groups, chattering about homework or television shows, while others preferred the solitary journey that gave them time to think. The walk itself became a classroom, teaching kids about traffic patterns, shortcuts, and the rhythms of their own neighborhoods. Some routes stretched over a mile, crossing highways or railroad tracks without a single adult present. Today, though, such freedom feels almost unimaginable. Schools discourage it, communities report it, and many jurisdictions classify unsupervised walking as potential neglect. What once built independence now raises alarms that echo through parent groups, social services, and courtrooms alike. You could set your clock by it. 6 o'clock meant dinner, and dinner meant every single person at the table. No phones, no distractions, and no skipping unless you were in a hospital bed. It did not matter if you were playing outside or in the middle of your favorite show. When mom called out that it was dinner time, you came running. The dining table was not just for food, it was for connection, for catching up, for hearing your dad talk about work even if you only understood half of it. It was where you heard family stories for the 10th time and laughed like it was the first. Sometimes it got loud, sometimes someone got scolded. But no matter what, it happened at 6, every day. It gave the day rhythm, like the closing note of a song. You might not remember every meal you had, but you remember the feeling of chairs scraping back, of plates being passed, of everyone being in the same room at the same time. These days, people eat at all hours, scattered between devices and to-go containers. But back then, dinner was a ceremony, a constant, and no one needed to say why it mattered. You just knew. In the 1970s, collecting soda bottles felt like a treasure hunt that stretched from ditches to parking lots to the shoulders of busy country roads. Kids wandered wherever bottles rolled or were tossed, climbing through tall grass, gravel, or weeds without any adult checking where they were headed. Parents encouraged it, because every bottle meant a few cents earned, and earning that money felt like striking gold in a world where kids rarely had pocket change. Children knew every ditch along their route, scanning the ground for the glint of glass or the familiar shape of a discarded bottle lying half-buried in dirt. No one questioned the safety of walking beside traffic or rummaging through roadside clutter. Cuts from broken glass were shrugged off as part of the job, and most kids wore their scratches with pride. The simple act of returning bottles to the corner store made them feel capable and responsible. Today, letting a child walk along a roadside scavenging for empties would be considered dangerous, unsupervised, and in many cases illegal due to trespassing and traffic laws. What once felt like harmless independence is now seen as an unnecessary risk the modern world refuses to ignore. Letting kids operate power tools without supervision was considered a normal part of growing up in the 1980s, especially in households where fathers worked with their hands and expected their children to learn the same skills. Boys and girls alike learned to use circular saws, drills, and sanders long before they reached their teenage years. Parents believed that hands-on experience taught responsibility, coordination, and respect for dangerous equipment in ways no lecture ever could. Kids built birdhouses, repaired fences, and helped with home improvement projects, while sawdust covered their clothes and the whine of machinery filled the garage. Accidents happened, but they were treated as lessons rather than crises. A scraped knuckle or a close call that reinforced caution better than any warning. Nobody called Child Protective Services over a 10-year-old using a jigsaw. Today, though, safety guidelines, insurance restrictions, and liability concerns have transformed power tools into adult-only territory. Manufacturers print age warnings, schools require supervision, and the idea of handing a child a running saw feels reckless by modern standards. Breaking something in a 1970s household was not just a clumsy accident, it was a full-blown event. You knew the moment it happened, your stomach dropped before the thing even hit the floor. Maybe it was a lamp, maybe it was the toaster, maybe it was your dad's cassette deck. No matter what it was, there was a price. If you were lucky, you paid for it out of your allowance, if you even had one. If not, you were grounded, sometimes both. The rule was simple. Actions had consequences, even if it was an accident, especially if it was an accident. Parents did not want to hear long-winded excuses about how the dog jumped or how it slipped or how you barely touched it. What they cared about was teaching you that stuff cost money and that you needed to respect what was in the house. Some kids learned how to fix things with glue and tape just to avoid the lecture. Others learned to confess quick before someone else got blamed. Either way, that sound of something breaking still haunts your dreams. Because in a 1970s home, everything was earned, and everything had value. And if you broke it, you knew what was coming. In the 70s, letting kids poke at a roaring fire was practically a household ritual passed down through generations. Parents believed that tending a fireplace or feeding logs into a wood stove taught responsibility, toughness, and a sense of self-reliance that every child supposedly needed. Kids learned to stack firewood, adjust vents, and stir embers long before they learned multiplication tables. It felt normal to sit inches away from an open flame with nothing but instinct guiding your movements. Sometimes a child would toss in a damp log just to watch it pop, or shove a metal poker deep into the coals because it glowed bright red like a magic wand. Parents trusted their children to know what too close meant, even though half the time kids did not think about danger at all. Singed sleeves, minor burns, and sparks landing on the carpet were simply part of the living room experience. A wood stove was considered the heart of the home, and the idea that a child should not touch it was almost unthinkable. Today, child protective guidelines classify these habits as unsafe and potentially negligent, because unsupervised fires are one of the most common causes of burns and house accidents. Fireplaces now come with screens, guards, warning labels, and strict recommendations to keep children far away. What was once a warm family memory is now a forbidden activity wrapped in safety codes and modern caution. They called it freedom, and we now know what it cost. If this one hit close to home, leave a like and subscribe.